Hi friends, happy Thursday. It's Miss Drywa. So for science today, we are going to be focusing on earthquakes and how earthquakes can change the Earth's surface. Now remember, an earthquake is when you feel shaking in the ground, but today we're going to learn how does an earthquake start and what causes that shaking. Now, just like our volcanoes, they can cause damage. They can be dangerous. Not always, but sometimes they can be. And in our textbook, we're going to talk about the state of California. Just like we live in the state of New York, there's also the state of California, and that's where a lot of earthquakes happen. We don't really have too many earthquakes here, but in California, they tend to have, certain parts of California, they tend to have a lot more earthquakes. So we're going to be focusing more on California today's reading. Okay, so we're going to read a little bit, I'll explain and talk it over with you. You'll do a Nearpod, some activities, and then you'll have a great day. Let's get started. So, my friends, I'm going to move me over. So the first thing I see is we have a glossary here. So again, that tells us some words that are important and we might not know. So earthquake, the shaking of the ground caused by rock movement along a fault. So kind of like we said, when you feel shaking in the ground, we're actually going to talk more about the rock movement and the faults today, so don't worry about that just yet. And then we have fault, a crack in the Earth's crust along which rocks move. So again, we already learned the fault is the crack in the top layer of the Earth, the crust. Now today we're going to talk about really what happens in that crack in order for us to feel an earthquake. So let's get started. How earthquakes change the earth. Earthquakes also change the shape of the land. An earthquake is the shaking part of the ground. What causes the shaking? The crust, or the top layer of the earth, is made up of large sections of rocks called plates. So, there are actually these plates. They're large sections of rock. So not just like the little rocks that we see outside, friends, but like big sections of rock, almost like a puzzle. And they all fit together. Okay? Now we can't really see that because it's on the inside of the earth, but it's there, so we have to imagine it. These plates are always moving. Sometimes the movement of the plates causes cracks in the crust. So when those plates move, sometimes a crack in the crust is caused. Okay? If the rocks move along the crack is called a fault. So we have our fault, a crack in the Earth's crust from the moving rocks or plates. When the rocks along a fault move, the ground shakes. Most earthquakes do not cause enough shaking for people to feel. So when we have that crack, that fault, right? There's a crack in our crust. So think about my two hands together. There's a crack in between them. When they move, right? The rocks move along that crack, a shaking happens. And sometimes it's very, very little and nobody even feels it and we just go about our days. However, sometimes it can be dangerous. However, some earthquakes cause great damage to buildings, bridges, and highways. So let's take a look at this picture here before we keep going. Thousands of earthquakes happen in California each year. So remember I said California is another state. Just like we live in New York, that's our state. There's also other states, and California is one of them. We've talked about this in social studies too. Many of these happen along the San Andreas Fault. So this is a very, very long fault that we're going to read about in 1 second. But you can actually see this one. Most of the time, friends, you cannot see faults. They're underground. Just like the plates, we can't really see them. They're under the ground. But this is one fault that we can see, and it's a very, very, very long fault along the coastline of California. Okay, and California is a very big state. Most faults happen deep inside the earth and are not seen on the Earth's surface. The picture on the left shows one fault that can be seen. This fault extends over 1,200 kilometers along the coast of California. That's a long crack. So like I said, friends, it's very, very long. It's on the coast of California, and it can be dangerous, friends. That's why they have a lot of earthquakes there. So let's take a look at this picture here. This Los Angeles freeway shows the kind of damage that an earthquake can cause. Los Angeles is also in California still. So an earthquake happened there, and look what happened to their freeway. It broke in half, it fell. It was ended here, and it fell, and it broke here. So it can be dangerous. Although sometimes we don't see them, sometimes they can be dangerous. All right, friends, so let's review. When we have our Earth's crust, our top layer of our Earth, remember they're the different layers. The top one is what we're focusing on right now. There are these plates, and they kind of look like a puzzle, right? And they fit certain ways, and they all fit in, but they all are next to each other, and they're always moving. And sometimes they move smooth, and it's not a problem, but other times when they move, they tend to like get stuck, and sometimes when they keep moving, shaking will occur. You know, have you ever tried to pull something and it's stuck and you start like shaking it and you're like pull, 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 but you're moving really fast, trying to get it loose? It's kind of the same thing if they get stuck. Okay, they begin to shake. Sometimes we don't feel that shaking, and it's fine. Other times we can feel the shaking, and sometimes it can even be very dangerous. So like talking about how the Earth looks, if we have things falling, buildings, bridges, that's going to change how the Earth looks on the outside. So volcanoes, earthquakes, they can change how our Earth's surface looks, how it looks on the outside. All right, friends? Great job. Bye.